It was with good reason that in 2010, shortly after I got elected to the Senate Republican Conference convened. A number of us hadn't even been sworn in yet. Senator Rand Paul and I were part of that class of 2010. Senator Pat Toomey, Marco Rubio, a handful of others. A lot of us had been elected against a backdrop that was very hostile toward earmarks, and with very good reason. For that reason, before we were even sworn in, we met as a conference, and the conference voted. We voted to adopt a ban on earmarks. The House Republican Conference did essentially the same thing at essentially the same time. And this stuck for a number of years, more or less. You know, aberrations here or there, but it stuck. It is still the conference, the conference policy of the Senate Republican Conference that we are opposed to earmarks. And yet we're returning to it. We're returning to it to our own detriment, but especially to the detriment of the American people. And it tends to remind me that my family hates it when I quote this scripture, but Proverbs 26:11, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to its folly. When you turn back to something that's familiar, that you're backsliding into a familiar but unhealthy position, that's what occurs. And so when we have an earmark-laden bill, and Republicans start heading headlong into it, notwithstanding our ongoing conference policy against earmarks, it reminds me of dogs, albeit dogs dressed as elephants returning to their vomit. That's not appropriate. It's not good for our voters. It's not good for the people we represent, whether they voted for us or not. Because look at what it produces. Look at what it does. We've got about 650 pages tacked onto this bill. Of just straight earmarks. Of those 650 or so pages, you've got over 6,000 separate earmarks. And there's a wide range of them. Look, I'm sure some of them fund good things that will benefit good people. And I'm sure some of them at least satisfy a part of that, but aren't necessarily the prerogative of the federal government. The purpose here is not to adjudicate each and every project on its own merits as to whether it should be funded by someone. The question is whether it should be funded by government, and in particular this government. And if it should be funded by this government, why not subject it to negotiation, discussion, an amendment process, debate under the light of day in which this can occur, rather than opening this up, foisting it upon the American people at the 11th hour, just a matter of days before it's to be voted on. And then we're told, oh, by the way, you can't really change this. You can't really change it unless it's something we want to change. We, meaning the self-appointed custodians of the bill and the highest-ranking appropriators in the Senate when it comes to taking out things that they don't want. So the bill involves a total of $470 billion. Of that, $12.7 billion involves earmarks. Now, a lot of people are fond of saying in this circumstance, well, it's just a small percentage. A tiny percentage of American GDP, still a small percentage of what we spend overall, and still a pretty small percentage even of just domestic, discretionary, non-defense spending. Whatever. Look, the fact remains, it may not be the entire length of the train, or even measurable as half or a quarter of it, or a third of the train, but it's what's driving the train. This is why we're $34 trillion and counting in debt. It's because members, seeing that there is a bill that's too big, that's too expensive, that funds too many things, are more likely to vote for something if you adopt what they sometimes call sweeteners. These addictive, corrupting substances within the bill that allow you to come home to your home constituencies or to this or to that special interest and say, I brought home the bacon. So why, for example, is it that we're being asked to provide some, I don't know, $850 million to Georgetown University? No, that one's not $850 million. That one is $963,000. $963,000, nearly $1 million, to Georgetown University. Now, Georgetown University has an endowment. Just in its endowment alone is over $3.2 billion. Why are we giving that to Georgetown? Why? Why likewise are we giving $850,000 to a left-wing entity called the New Immigrant Community Empowerment Center that's going to use that to build, and I believe the correct terminology is a coffee house, a coffee shop and a greenhouse. That may be great. I don't know why that greenhouse and that coffee shop are being constructed by government, being constructed by this government with this government's funding, without it seeing the light of day. And so, a few of us went down to the floor to raise some objections to these, and also to another one to spend $2.5 million for outdoor recreation, specifically kayaking and slalom activities for the town of Franklin, New Hampshire. Those are fun things. They're great. People want to have the ability to do them. Why is the U.S. taxpayer being forced to work months out of every year just to pay his or her federal taxes, only to be told it's not nearly enough because we're $34.5 trillion in debt? And by the way, we're going to have to make you throw in $2.5 million for these recreational activities, kayaking and slalom activities in Franklin, New Hampshire. I do not know, but these things, we're told, can't be debated. We tried to have them removed. I tried to strike them, and I was told by the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, sorry, no can do. This is a hermetically sealed chamber. It's been a finely wrought compromise, and there is no changing it now. Only there's a problem. They have been making changes. They made a change last night. They made a change after it was discovered that they had set aside $1 million for what's been characterized as funding for BDSM sex parties. And they were embarrassed to defend that, so Senator Murray went to the floor and had that removed. So apparently it can be opened up. It's just it can be opened up and changed only for things that she cares about. This is a mess. And no sane person would say that the governing body of any organization, whether it's a corporation and its board of directors, a state legislature, or the legislative branch of the United States government, should operate like this, where the single most important type of decision it makes, a funding decision to keep the entity funded, in this case in about half of the budget categories, should be made by a small handful of people who negotiate behind closed doors, expecting the Senate and the House as a whole to just rubber stamp what they've done and to tell them, little peasants, go away. We, the people who negotiated this, are the only ones who can touch it. That's insulting to the American people, and it's going to perpetuate the problem. So I'm going to turn it over now to my friend and colleague, the senator from Kansas, Roger Marshall.